Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. My name is Jason Buffington, and tuning in for this week is Industry Insights. I am joined by my good friend and colleague, Karinne Bessette. Now, I am coming from the great state of Texas. Ren, where are you coming from today?
Today, the great state of Texas.
There you go. There you go. Next time we should try to find a closer location where we could do these together. I think that'd be more fun. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is everything hybrid, right? So we've been doing a series for a while now from the Data Protection Trends 2024 report, right? So 1,200 unbiased IT leaders. So we go off and we use third-party analyst firms, third-party research houses. They go ask vetted IT leaders, vetted IT implementers. What are y'all thinking about? See, that's the Texas in me coming out. What are y'all thinking about in for your overall IT strategy? How does it relate to cyber? How does it relate to DR? How does it relate to containers? And how does it relate to clouds? So Ren, you spend the majority of your day in the clouds, pun intended. Let's let's talk about this first data point. You know, you've been with Veeam longer than I have, I think. And when we talk about the shifts that we've seen 6 years ago, this chart would have just had the red and the green, right? So it would have had a portion of the servers that were where servers were running on physical metal, and then the portion of the infrastructure which is running in virtual metal, virtual machines. Pick your favorite hypervisor, right? But take a look at that really big blue wedge on that left-hand side. What are you seeing from all of your intersections and conversations? And by the way, does this chart surprise you?
No, it doesn't. It would have probably when I started at Veeam. So when I started at Veeam, 2016 timeframe, we first started to think about the SaaS infrastructure, and that I think was the gateway to us looking at other hyperscales like PaaS and IaaS. When we started to get the software as a service, we started to feel more comfortable with our workloads running there and have that comfortable kind of conversation. Now, what are we 6 years later? We're starting to see that on AWS, GCP, and inside of Azure. And one of my favorite questions to ask out in the community, are you running one? And the answer is always no. There's no longer this idea of a Microsoft shop or a VMware shop or the Mac only shop. We have whatever tool works best for our infrastructure. And we sort of start to just go that way and branch out the expertise as we need them.
So just for the folks at home, I probably forgot this step, but let me tell you what this chart's actually saying so you don't have to zoom in quite so far. So every year, one of the questions that Veeam asks in the Data Protection Trends Research Project is what percentage of your production workloads are running in each of the three modalities that you see on that left-hand side. And I think just if you're taking notes at home, notice that blue wedge is almost half of the circle, right? So easy math, roughly 50-50 between workloads that are running on premises within a data center of your choice, and then, as Ren mentioned, one or more clouds. And that can include not only just the hyperscale clouds, but also the SaaS platforms, the PaaS platforms as well. So roughly half and half on and off-prem. Of the slightly more than half that is on-prem, notice that the green wedge and the red wedge are nearly equal numbers, right? So roughly 50-50 split. Now, this is going to vary based on the size of your organization. Longer organizations, you know, if you've been around for 30, 40, 50 years, you probably have a lot more investment in metal, physical and virtual on-prem, and so you can see that percentage a little bit higher. If you're a more modern organization, you might have embraced cloud a little bit faster. But I do think it's interesting, you know, half and half physical or on-prem to off, within the on, roughly half to between physical and virtual. I think it's also kind of poignant that, you know, when you think about Veeam, we started in the virtualization space, right? So we kind of own that beautiful little green wedge in that lower right hand third, but that's only 27% of the environment, right? So for the rest of the environment, if the only thing that Veeam was interested in was virtualization, we literally would be solving 1/4 of the customer's problem, and that's not actually true. You want to give a quick. We do touch everything on this screen for the most part. Let's do a short Veeam commercial, and then let's get back to what the data is saying for everything else.
So with Veeam, I can still remember a time frame where we said we would never do physical servers. And we only started in virtualization and we dominated the space. I actually came from our support organization and I remember 5 people in charge of our on-premises physical agents because it really hadn't taken off and we didn't think this was going to be a growing part of the ecosystem. Well, time kind of went on and it's gone through this back and forth struggle. What is cheaper? Sometimes it had become cheaper to move something up to the cloud. I come back to SaaS applications because that's a side that I live in a lot. But it also became a lot cheaper to run that in a cloud, not have to worry about the on premises access to all of these servers for external collaborators out in the field just to get their email. Then we migrate over to still having physical servers for high data processing in the back end, and then cloud when it makes sense. We have the MSP side, we have the hyperscalers, but they've kind of all had this back and forth. What's going to be cheaper? Now we're even talking about containers.
Yeah. So, okay, wait. Are you saying the cloud is not always cheaper? I thought it was free because we don't have metal. It's just there, right? So, no, that is not
Not a
true.
charity.
Not a charity. Cloud is not a charity. Right? There's some great operational and economic benefits that you can get from cloud services, but it ain't necessarily cheaper. It's about value, not necessarily about cost. Okay, so we spent quite a bit on this. And again, one of the reasons that we always start with this data is because it helps us understand the landscape on which we should be talking about data protection and the set of capabilities that Veeam ought to be offering. The reason why you've got 2 folks from the Office of CTO doing this research is because it helps us with what should we build next? What are the features that matter most for customers that are on that modern side? So let's talk a little bit more about that. And from the same project, one of the other questions that was asked was really we're looking around enterprise backup. And as you can see here, there's actually 2 questions. So the long lines to the right-hand side, we're asking, what does enterprise backup mean to you, right? Just as a taxonomy in term. But it's actually sorted by the short line, which because in the green ones, you could choose as many as you wanted. The short lines is if you are looking for a new enterprise backup solution today, what's the most important attribute? I think it's interesting, first and foremost, and a little bit damning, that the number one response was, it's got to work, right? So, consistently reliable is a big deal. But I think it's interesting that the next option, most important, would be the support of cloud-based workloads like IaaS and SaaS, especially when you think about if you are using a legacy backup solution to try to back up one of those modern workloads, you will not get that reliability number that you were looking at from before. So I think you could almost pair these together. Ren, think about the early days in support when someone was trying to put agents inside of every VM and then wondering why they couldn't back up VMs. It feels like in some cases we're almost at that, at least for the legacy backup solutions. Otherwise, what are your thoughts on this? What are you seeing?
So I am a fan of the word marketecture, meaning that we come up with these marketing terms and then we define what those actually mean within a business. That's actually what Jason and I spend a lot of time doing. It's called thought leadership. But I feel like sometimes it gets lost to what this word actually means versus what are the expectations by customers. And this really displays how everyone has a different idea of what's most important. And I think that's the entire thing. What is enterprise backup? Prioritizing the consistency within your backup, making sure you support the applications in your on-premises cloud, whatever kind of environment that you're running, and that you have some type of regulatory reasoning behind whatever you're doing. Because if we don't plan for regulatory pivoting, then you're going to end up paying the bill at the end.
I love that last read. One thing that I think a lot of folks, especially in hybrid architectures, forget about is when you think about things like regulatory compliance and mandates, for some reason, folks forget that just because you decided to run your workloads in a service instead of on a server, that somehow some of those rules don't apply. And that is not true, right? So if you have a requirement to retain data for 7 years, it's your data, you got to retain it for 7 years, right? If you have a mandate that your data has to deal with certain sovereign citizens and cannot leave those sovereign boundaries, your data can't leave those boundaries, right? Which means you need both a production cloud and a separate backup repository still within that same magic dotted line, right? So there's some great insights. We should spend more time talking about the regulatory side of that along the way. Anything else kind of stand out to you on this one? Otherwise, we are just flying through, but this is some good stuff that I'm hopefully creating some conversations for the kids at home.
So what I think, just bringing back to a cost metric conversation, is tape is still on this list. Enterprises still care about tape because data is growing at exponential rates. And since it's growing at this exponential rate, we need to have mediums that are cost effective to organizations to still be able to meet these compliance of 7 years. You don't want a high cost object storage that you're going to end up paying for when you can send it to a lower cost tape storage and have it in an off-site location where you can still access it for compliance and regulatory needs.
Love that. Love that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about IaaS and SaaS. We talked about the misnomer that that folks still have to retain that data for the same length of time. I think one of the other things that folks often forget is, Ren, certainly when you said you spent a lot of time in SaaS, certainly those big SaaS platforms, 365, Salesforce, those kind of things, they cover backup for you, so you don't have to, right? So, that should solve the problem there. So we're really just talking about IaaS in this case, right?
So I feel like we have a lot of these conversations, no matter what technology that we're talking about. I can still remember VMware snapshots being called a backup.
Yeah.
Education is the primary way around getting your data in a reliable and consistent fashion. When it comes to the Microsoft 365 environment, for example, we have the shared responsibility model with Microsoft. Microsoft states where their responsibility line is versus the line that is responsible from the Microsoft infrastructure. Then they define, okay, we're going to cover the networking, the physical storage, the access server. But we're going to leave it in your hands in order to configure that access server so that it cannot be penetrated by someone it shouldn't be.
Yep.
And if anyone comes through the front door, they're not responsible for the damages inside of that environment due to a legal access because negligence in the configuration.
Okay, so yeah, and I wish I almost want to get like a QR code that's just permanently on every webcast I do that just points back to those shared responsibility models. So one of the other things that's also, I think, a little bit of a misnomer is that once you put your workloads up in a cloud, right? So, and we'll just use IaaS as an example. SaaS is a little bit of a nuance on that, but let's just use the cloud in the proverbial sense. We'll put air quotes around it and everything. One of the other assumptions is that once it's in the cloud, it's protected from things like cyber. The cloud never goes down. Infrastructure in the cloud never breaks. Let's talk about some of those kinds of calamities that are going on. So in this case, one of the other questions from the data protection report, so you're looking at the blue lines, is choose all the reasons that caused an outage in the past 2 years. Right. So organizations were asked that first, and you can see those long blue lines. Here's the fun part. Ren, I know the Texas education system failed me in many different ways, but I'm just going to go on a guess and say those blue lines add up to more than 100%, meaning that for the most, I'm guessing 250 towards 300, meaning that multiple outages were caused by multiple different kinds of things over time. So we know there's a lot of different things causing outages. What you're also looking at on the worm, the yellows, oranges, and red lines, is what was the single cause of the most impactful outage of each of the last 3 years. So the most recent is in red, the one before that is orange, one before that is in yellow. Ren, okay, you can't not talk about cyber in a 2024 IT conversation, and take a look. It's on the top of the list.
It's almost double the second top of that list, in fact. It is incredibly damaging, not just to the data in an infrastructure, but reputations that are suffered by companies. And if you live over in Europe and you don't publicly post that you have been under a cyber security attack, you can actually be under a violation and penalized for thousands and thousands of euros just for not reporting it as soon as you knew it happened, to let any one of your stakeholders know that they may be in breach of their compliance because your compliance was then breached.
Okay, things just got a lot bit scarier. And if you haven't checked out the episode that we did from the Data Protection Trends Report, specifically on ransomware and frequency, really recommend that you go check that one out. But I think the other thing to notice here is that each year that's on this chart, Ren, you mentioned that that cyber was the most impactful by nearly 2 to 1. I do think it's interesting, natural disaster near the bottom of the list, yay. So fires and floods don't happen as often as cyber events. A lot of stuff doesn't happen quite as often as a cyber event. And yet we're not seeing all those other things go away, right? And so I think the takeaway I would offer to the kids at home, there are a couple backup companies out there that are pretending they're not actually backup companies anymore. They're cybersecurity companies. Try this with me and tell me if you like this or not. If I built an entire solution that would prevent fires, I may have forgotten to protect against floods.
That's absolutely correct. And I like to say there is no magic bullet. You're building an onion of protection. You want to keep as many things out as possible, but you need layers in order to do that. And not one thing is going to protect you from all of the items that are listed here. And you're about 1 in 10 of having one of these happen to your company based off these numbers.
Yeah, so I think that's the same reason why should you do backups or snapshots? No, wrong question, right? So you should be doing backups and snapshots and replicas, because each one of those within the data center is going to give you recoverability for different kinds of things. Arguably, if the only thing you're protecting for is cyber, you still get a flood. You can still catch on fire. You can still have hard drives that fail. By the way, the other thing about this list, most of these things still apply even if you're on cloudy metal, right? Topic of today's conversation is hybrid. Ren, patches still go bad on an IaaS hosted server. Users still delete stuff on an IaaS hosted server. The cloud doesn't solve hardly any of these.
There are a couple Twitter handles that I follow, and almost every major cloud provider has it. If you subscribe to this handle, all of a sudden your entire Twitter inbox X inbox gets filled with all of these messages saying, hey, there's an intermittent outage for this service in this area. And you start to see the bigger impact. Yes, you might not personally be affected, but the larger your company is, the more likely you are to be affected at some point. And things go wrong. No one's perfect.
We should probably throw that X handle in the social media feeds before it's over. Or you can just send an email to askren@veeam.com. No, that doesn't actually work. But I'm going to ask IT because I just think that would be a hoot. Anyway, my point being, there's a lot of things that can cause outages. In fact, you could argue that like number 5 on the list for outage of public cloud, if you put all your stuff into a cloud, or as you mentioned before, more than one cloud, and then all of a sudden you have a breach of being able to get to those clouds, you're just as down because you can't get to your data. Is that fair?
What about the entire data center, and it was in Australia, that caught fire, and anyone that had their data there, it was just gone. Yeah. They've been through lawsuit after lawsuit, and once a company goes bankrupt, you're not getting any type of reputation back from that or any type of money to help fix whatever data that you've lost. It could be customer information, it could be insider application development, things that are profitable and are no longer profitable because of a fire that you weren't responsible for, but someone you trusted had.
Yeah, and again, we could talk about all the different things about IT that we're, talked about the complexity of the different platforms. We've talked about the need for consistent protection and management at scale, and now we're talking about all the bad things that can happen, because the punchline is all the bad things can still happen. What I hope you take away for those that are listening is that hybrid doesn't solve those. Hybrid unlocks some massive agility, can give you some economic benefits, gives you some rapid time to value. It gives you some great geo separation. There's a lot of great things that hybrid can do, but solving backup and or solving downtime and solving cyber are not one of them, which makes all of these things so applicable. We got one more piece of data that I just kind of want to get your lens on. Actually, maybe it's 2. Let's see. All right, so one of the other questions that was asked, right? So if cloud is the approach for modern production, one of the other questions that was asked was, what does modern data protection look like? And so in this case, everyone, this is another choose all, choose one. I picked the choose one because I think it's super interesting here. Take a look at the gold one on the top. When folks were asked what was the most important aspect of a modern or innovative data protection solution, the number one, by a good margin, was that the data protection tools integrate with cyber. Rin, you're in a lot of frontline conversations with senior IT leaders. Does this surprise you? And what are you seeing overall in the industry as well as what Veeam's doing?
I think this is driven a lot by cyber being a part of every conversation out there because we're getting more public news. We used to see all of the national arrest or things that are happening out there, but everyone's talking more about cyber, and the scary things are not getting swept under the rug anymore. And even higher ups and C-levels are looking at, oh, wow, this is a real world factor that could affect my company.
Mm-hmm.
And now they want it integrated with everything. But you do have to kind of tailor with a cautious tale that your integrations need to make sense. You need to ask yourself why and how to position this in order to be the most effective. If you're scanning your regular infrastructure, your production infrastructure with the same AV, with the same signatures that you're scanning your backup, you're probably not getting any further along the chain of catching something early and being able to protect your entire infrastructure. Yes, it might help on restore, but you need to mitigate and slow down anything that comes into your network because that's all you can hope for. It's not an if, it's when you're attacked and how slow can you make it to pivot through the infrastructure.
So I really like the idea of when you think about data protection, it shouldn't necessarily be that the data protection comes with cyber. It's cool when it has some kind of built-in scanning built in, but the idea of the data protection platform or architecture being able to integrate with multiple other cyber kinds of tools so that you can use your cyber tools of choice, your partners can use their cyber tools of choice, your security specialists that you've pre-hired to do your forensics and your prevention and your planning and your testing can use their tools of choice, right? So I love that idea of integration. But Ren, we're here talking about clouds. So take a look at the 4 different cloudy things that showed up within this top 10 list. There's a couple on here that I think are interesting. Let's work from the bottom up. I like the idea, I'm a huge fan actually, of leveraging cloud infrastructure as your DR site. I like it because it's always modern. I like it because it's guaranteed out of the building. I like it because unless you're an enterprise, you don't have multiple data centers. And so the cloud gives you a DR site when you need it and not so much when you don't. But let's work our way up. So the ability to move workloads from on-prem to cloud, sure, we're a P2C, V2C type of flavor. We've talked earlier, just working our way up that list, that one of the others that's out there is ensuring consistency of protection between on-prem and SaaS. We talked about that. I built this one last because it's kind of my favorite, right? So when we talk about the idea of moving workloads from one cloud to another, I know you spend a lot of your time talking with 365 environments. That's a passion area for you and certainly a level of deep expertise that we appreciate. I have heard more often than I care to admit when, say, a dev team started up an application and they ran it in Google Cloud as the example, or they ran it in Amazon as the example, and then the CFO, not the CIO, figured out that, hey, we have a bunch of 365, which means we have a whole bunch of Azure credits, and I'm trying to get rid of my Mac quota along that way. So I want to move a workload from some other cloud onto Azure. That's just one example. They're not necessarily my favorite. Moving a workload from one cloud to another is not as simple as it sounds. Rin, you want to get nerdy on this one?
So one of the things I like to point out, and it's actually one of my security presentations, is people, process, technology. When your technology is spanning across multiple clouds, none of them work the same way, none of them are sized the same way, and none of them are even secured the same way or even within the same security concepts. They're all different. And that leads you back to people not being trained on those processes in order to be able to leverage those clouds properly. And if you have a sprawl across all of these clouds, it may be something that you want to consider consolidating to whatever makes most sense to the expertise in your organization. Otherwise, you might be leaving a door open to let an attacker come in. And if you've left that door open, they're no longer responsible as a cloud providers to protect that data.
There's a lot in that. We should do a webinar sometime. That would be fun. The the way I try to describe it to at least the C-level audience, because I can't get as deep into the tech part of it, is Amazon will help you get your workload from the on-prem data center into Amazon. Google has utility that'll get it into GCP. Microsoft has utility that'll get it into Azure. But the idea of actually being able to move it from one place to the other is actually not that different than, Ren, I've heard some rumors that not everybody is really, really excited to keep using the hypervisor on-prem that they've been using for the last couple of years. So the idea of, hey, could I maybe move a workload from one hypervisor to another? And that sounds a whole lot like moving a workload from one cloud to another. And the answer is, yeah, if you're backing it up, each virtual instance as a logical unit, and then handling the plumbing to change the meta so that it can stand back up someplace else. Does that hold water for you?
I think you're 100% on point with that. And I think it really also tailors into people think you're stuck in their environment once you move your data there. Whether we're talking about different hypervisor companies that are going through some more corporate turmoil that you're not so sure how they're going to process, if the cost goes up, if you're going to be able to afford it in your budget, because the more you pay for infrastructure, the less you get to pay for security, unless you get paid for an IT guy working in the office.
Wait. Okay, you got to say that one for the kids at home just a little bit slower, because that might be the gold out of this whole thing. The more you
pay for infrastructure, the less budget you have for something like security and your paycheck.
Yeah. Okay. That is the reason that we all tuned in today, is to remember that point. So as you're thinking about which hypervisor of choice, as you're thinking about which clouds of choice, be thinking about mobility as part of that fray. Ren, we're almost out of time, but I do think there's one more point to talk about here, and that is, we've talked about a lot of things that if you are using a legacy backup solution, or maybe something that's just not that maybe doesn't cover all the clouds that you want, maybe something that can't spell Kubernetes, whatever that is, there's a lot of there's a lot of angst around, is my data protection solution sufficient? And so, and I'm not going to make a case for any of our favorite backup product. What I am going to point out, though, is one of the other questions from the survey. 1,200 organizations were surveyed, all sizes, 1,000 users up, so enterprises, large enterprises, et cetera. One of the questions was, what is the likelihood that your organization will change its primary backup solution or service within the next 12 months? And I got to tell you, I have been in the data protection space 35 years. It has always been a myth. It has never been true that people don't change. But the fact that we actually have statistical data that says more than half intend to, I just think is amazing along the way. On all your frontline conversations, does this ring true as far as everyone's trying to do better? Is that fair?
I think everyone wants to do better. And anytime you have an event in your organization and you have to configure and trust your backup software, if it fails you, you're 100% looking your new renewal cycle for a new software that's going to offer you consistency. I don't even think of this as legacy backup. I actually don't like the term legacy backup, because it's could be modern software that still fails you in the end. If you can't figure out how to restore your data, if it doesn't restore the data in a way that your organization needs, it's failed you regardless of how legacy or modern it might be.
Yeah. So just, as final clarification on this particular data point, the data doesn't actually say that by December 31st of 2024, 54% of organizations will have changed backup solutions. What it does mean is that at least 54% of IT organizations are going to go look, right? It's like saying 54% of families are going to go look at buying a new car. 54% are going to walk into a showroom. Not every one of them will close a deal this year. Not everyone will drive home on newer tires, but 54% are going to look. Another 19%, they're driving by. They see a couple shiny things on the lot. They're going to think about it. Only 1 in 4 say, no, not buying a new car this year. That may not necessarily be because they love their current car. It might just be because they don't think they have budget. And on that note, take a look on the left-hand side, because one of the other questions, not part of the chart, but one of the other questions was, how's your budget, right? 92% of the organizations surveyed in the 24 report said that their 2024 budget was up year over year compared to their 2023 data protection budget. I think that's interesting. It's actually up only by 6.6%, which may not sound like a lot until you realize that IDC and Gartner said that overall IT spending is up 3.5%. This is up nearly 7, nearly 2x overall spend, which means everyone's getting a little bit of money. Data protection is getting twice what everyone else is getting. And oh, by the way, that means somebody else ain't getting any new raises at all. So there's some fun math that goes into this. I'm going to point people to the QR code in the upper right-hand corner. You want to go download all the data from this year's report. Please go hit that link overall. And then, Ren, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give you the final word to close this out.
I have had a fantastic time as always. I appreciate everyone tuning in. And if anything else, I hope this really gets you thinking about your hybrid solution and having the right conversations so your business can make the right choices.
With that, thanks for everyone watching. We know that you're hybrid. The only question we're asking now is how are you going to back it up? So have a good day.